I remember the day I first set foot in this old house, the way the realtor tried to mask her unease with a forced smile. "It's a steal," she'd said, but her eyes told a different story. I should have listened to those eyes. It had been 6 months since my divorce, and I was desperate for a fresh start. The house, nestled deep in the woods, seemed like the perfect place to heal, to be alone with my thoughts. I'd always loved solitude, but now it had become a necessity. The first night was peaceful enough. The silence was all-encompassing, and the only light came from the full moon filtering through the trees outside. I slept like a baby, wrapped in a cocoon of solitude. It was on the second night that things began to change. I awoke to a soft whisper, like the rustling of leaves on a gentle breeze. I sat up, straining my ears to catch any hint of what it might be. But there was nothing. Just the persistent darkness and the oppressive silence. Shaking my head, I dismissed it as a product of an overactive imagination. The house was old after all, and old houses have their quirks. The next morning, I set about exploring my new surroundings. The house was large, with creaking wooden floors and a musty smell that clung to everything. But it had character, and I could see its potential. I was determined to make it my own. As the days passed, the strange occurrences continued. Objects would move when I wasn't looking, and I would hear faint whispers in the dead of night. Sometimes I could swear I saw shadows darting just out of sight, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there. I decided to brush it off as stress, a side effect of the divorce and the isolation. Loneliness can play tricks on the mind, I told myself. But deep down, a growing unease gnawed at me. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, I felt a cold breeze rush through the room, chilling me to the bone. I turned to see the windows were all closed, and the front door securely shut. Yet the chill persisted, and I watched in horror as my breath formed frosty plumes in the air. That night, I retreated to my bedroom early, seeking the comfort of my blankets and the hope of a dreamless sleep. But as I lay there, I heard the whispers again, this time louder and more insistent. They seemed to come from the very walls of the house, as if the wood itself was speaking secrets. I couldn't take it any longer. Panic washed over me like a tidal wave, and I fled the room, running blindly through the darkened house. The whispers followed me, growing louder with each step. I reached the front door and flung it open, desperate to escape the malevolent presence that had taken hold of my home. The night air was cool and soothing as I stood on the porch, gasping for breath. I was ready to run, to leave this cursed place behind, but then I heard a voice that was not a whisper, but a low, guttural growl. It came from behind me, from within the house. I turned slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. What I saw froze the blood in my veins. The doorway was no longer empty. A figure, a shadowy silhouette, stood there, its eyes glowing with an unnatural, malevolent light. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. All I could do was stare as the figure slowly advanced toward me. Its form seemed to shift and contort, as if it were composed of pure darkness. And then it spoke, its voice a chorus of tormented souls. "Leave this place," it hissed, its voice sending shivers down my spine. "Leave before it's too late." Without thinking, I turned and ran into the woods, not daring to look back. The branches scratched at my skin, and the ground was uneven and treacherous. But I didn't stop until I had put a great distance between myself and that accursed house. I found myself in a small clearing, gasping for breath, and I finally dared to look back. The house loomed in the distance, its windows dark and empty. I knew then that I could never go back. That place was not meant for the living, and I had narrowly escaped its clutches. I found a motel in the nearest town and spent the night there, trying to make sense of what had happened. The motel room was sterile and lifeless, but it felt safe in comparison to that house. In the morning, I contacted the realtor and told her I wanted to sell the house. I didn't care about the loss I would incur. I just wanted to be rid of it. She agreed to help, though I could sense her reluctance over the phone. A few weeks later, the sale was finalized, and I watched with a mix of relief and dread as a new family moved in. I wanted to warn them, to tell them what I had experienced, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. They say that ignorance is bliss, and in this case, I hoped it would be true. I never returned to that house in the woods, and I never looked back. But the memories of that night still haunt me, and I can't help but wonder what lurked in the shadows of that forsaken place. Some mysteries are better left unsolved, and some homes are better left abandoned. So, if you ever come across a charming old house deep in the woods with a for sale sign out front, I urge you to keep driving. Some houses hold secrets that are best left undisturbed, and some shadows should never be allowed to escape.